The purpose of this video is to run through an application called DVDA OPC Connector, and it's essentially an application that sits in a network as a piece of middleware between a Delta V system and an OPC DA server. So OPC DA servers, they're used by many different software and equipment manufacturers to allow instrument data and parameter data to be fed back into control systems, as an example. And the concept of an application like this is particularly relevant now with respect to DCOM hardening and upcoming updates that are coming from Microsoft. So essentially, DCOM settings with upcoming Microsoft updates are going to be turned off by default. So the DCOM settings then have to be configured, going forward. So DVDA connector is an application which is essentially aiming to sit on an OPC-DA server itself to then be able to take the actual parameters and tags from the OPC-DA server and then essentially push them to a Delta V system, or to actually then reach out to the Delta V system and then pull the values back. So to be very much in a read mode, then to be very much in a write mode. So this is the DVDA OPC connector here, and it's essentially sitting on a machine by itself that is running, just for the cases here, it's running basically Kepware. So Kepware is just being used as an OPC-DA server example, and there's numerous test tags that have been basically set up here. And if I give across kind of an example of a typical architecture scenario, this here would be, say, where you have like a virtualized environment, and in the virtualized environment you have like this kind of Delta V server as such, and then you have, say, for example, here an OPC server, and we'll say, for example, that this is an OPC server which operates in OPC DA mode as such, and then that this OPC server is representative of a piece of equipment out in an operational or production environment, such as, say, for example, you can have temperature control units or purified water skids, for example. So to go back to the actual application itself, the application is set up to look some way similar to other applications like, say, Kepware or Macatron and so on, but this application has been done to be very, very simplified, and it's very, very targeted towards the Delta V control system. So essentially the way things work here is that you have essentially server settings, and the server settings are highly simplified. You just simply have the actual IP address, you have the port number, then you have a typical account here. It's an actual user account of one of the developers of the application. And then essentially then you have this tag editor screen, and you're allowed to set up groups to literally say, right, here's a group to push out in write mode, and then here's a group in read mode as such. Okay, so I will run this application live. This is the actual demo itself, but I want to kind of highlight a production scenario of why this is particularly relevant at the moment. So if I open up, say, I have a Delta V screen here open, and I'm just going to come down to an example kind of HMI. So this screen here is representative of, say, for example, a piece of equipment, and in this case here, it's actually a purified water skid. And what would actually normally happen with kind of a piece of equipment often out in the field, where it's not directly controlled by, say, for example, by Delta V, as in it's not actually something that's controlled directly by a Delta V controller as such. You will have some kind of an exercise where some items on the actual skid, the purified water skid in this case, are monitored and others are controlled. So say, for example, if I want to look at, say, different elements which are particularly interesting, right, to look at on this piece of equipment, you might look at, say, pH in a DI tank. You look at, say, for example, if you have a heat exchanger here, you want to look at temperature directly after, and then before it goes back into the DI tank, you want to look at flow, conductivity, pressure, etc. In the system. And then maybe, say, for example, you want to be able to control this particular valve here, put in a request to say, look, I have a tank which feeds, say, for example, a purified water loop, such as here, and you want to be able to actually fill up your purified water system. And effectively, if the Microsoft update is done, what someone needs to hear from an operational point of view is that the requests, the interaction essentially with the Delta V system will break, because you'll no longer be able to actually interact with the OPC-DA server, which effectively was the interaction between Delta V and the piece of equipment. So DVDA OPC connector will essentially sit on this machine and then allow the automation group and the IT infrastructure group essentially install the Microsoft updates, and there's no need to go down into the low level I suppose exercise of DCOM hardening and playing around with all the DCOM settings. Okay, so just to finish off, what I'll do is I'll run through basically a practical example of the application in use. So I'm going to open up two screens. I'm going to open up a test system, so just a test screen, and I will literally just put him over here, and then I'm going to put him just over here. Okay, so effectively this is a live Delta V screen which is going to send values back and forth, and this is the DVDA connector. So effectively I'm just going to go into run mode. So I'm just going to run this application here, and the demo, it effectively runs just for a short period of time. Similar is as you would find with say for example Kepware and so on. So effectively the application, if I open up Kepware, I'll be able to kind of use this quick client here, and this is a completely separate machine. As you can see up here, it's called APPC22, and then this other machine here is called APPC3. And effectively what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at communication going from Delta V down to the OPC-DA server. So here, for example, I'll just change that value to 110. And you'll see that this value here changed to 110, and then effectively we'll go back the way. So you see this value of number 4. Basically I'll just go in, apologies there, and I will go in and I'll just give them a value of 8 as an example. And you'll see it's 8, and then you'll see on the Delta V system it became 8 as well. So essentially this machine here in testing has been I suppose put in a position where you can imagine that this is where the DCOM settings have been completely clamped down. There is no DCOM open, and yet OPC-DA is operating with Delta V. So if there's any questions that anyone needs to put forward, there's a contact email below, and also then the OPC-DVA OPC connector application is available in demo mode. It'll run for 2 hours, and that's available on the web page on the link below. Thank you very much.